Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 22 of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. And today we've got quite a few returning mods, but that's okay. They're all common returning new species, so I think it's worth talking about them again. But we're going to be starting off with 3 out of the 4 animals from the Sweeteners kind of mix and match pack, however you want to say it. Really interesting group of animals. So we're going to be starting off today with a Amurosaurus. Really cool animal here. Let's have a look as we walk around. So let's first person mode this. So Amurosaurus is a dinosaur, of course. They're a Lambosaurian hadrosaur, related to animals such as Corythosaurus and Lambeosaurus, as they're quite loud. These guys were found in the latest Cretaceous of Eastern Asia, and they get the name kind of Amurosaurus because they're found around the Amur River, which is in Siberia, around like Russia. And they were first discovered in 1991, and also are called kind of the Black Dragon River in Chinese, so Halajiang. That's kind of their Chinese name, but still really awesome animals. And they've been recovered from a single bone bed that was discovered in 1984, which was in the city limits of Blakoveshchik in eastern Russia. And they were kind of found from the Maastrichtian. They were first thought to be from Maastrichtian, but were deposited about the 68 million years ago, so about right at the end of the Cretaceous, really, which is pretty cool. Let's see them do their social animation here. And they were laid down by a floodplain or a river that transported the fossils and created this really interesting bone bed. And only a small section of the bone bed has been recovered, but there have been a lot of found of Amurosaurus or Lambosaurians like this, but they're mostly juveniles. And yeah, really cool. The holotype is an original specimen, is just the maxilla and stuff like that. But there's a lot more known from like the skull and things like that. And there's actually a specimen as well that's been found with hypertrophied and swollen distal region, which is pretty interesting as well. And it indicates that the bone was actually healing after the death of the not after the death of the dinosaur, was healing prior to the death of the animal. So likely it would have hurt this itself and kind of hurt itself and then healed up and then died in this in the bone bed, which kind of sucks, but shows that this dinosaurs lived through the school of hard knocks all through that. And in terms of classification, as I mentioned, these guys are a member of the Lambosaurian hadrosaur, so they're related to animals such as Velophrons and Olorotitan and Lambeosaurus are great examples of these guys, right before kind of the Paralosophony or Parasaurophiliny, have you say that? And we're most likely kind of distantly related to those guys and distantly related to things like Lambeosaurus, but in that same group of a Lambosaurian. But managed to live up right at the end of the Cretaceous, so doing quite well in that regard. So yeah, really cool to see these guys around here. So that was done by Sweetener. Sweetener really did a wonderful job with that. We'll be moving on next of these guys. Make sure to run off and not block my view of that thing. So let's you guys run off. I don't know why they're like hanging around there for some reason. We've got here Hylaeosaurus, which is an ankylosaur, which we'll get into. Very interesting in the history of dinosaurs as well. So let's release them. So this is Hylaeosaurus, how you pronounce that. Let's do a first person mode again. I think we'll pause it this time because I want to get a good look at these guys. So let's have a look at you. Really wonderful colors I think they got going on here. So Hylaeosaurus, as you can see, is an ankylosaur, nodosaur technically. These guys come from about 136 million years ago, some of the early Cretaceous of England. They've got really small eyes, if you notice there. And really, really interesting. They're actually one of the first dinosaurs to be discovered. They were discovered in the 20th of July, 1832 by Gideon Mantell. And this was kind of one of the three dinosaurs Richard Owen based Dinosauria on. So the group of Dinosauria, which was including Iguanodon and Megalosaurus. And it really has an interesting history about that, like the fossil dealers and everything like that. And then basically throughout time, there's been lots of different interpretations of them, like spikes and stuff. Like it looks like almost like a giant iguana. Then as we learn more about this guy and other ankylosaurs, we then find out Hylaeosaurus actually looks like this, and it's really, really interesting. There have been lots of remains also found in the Isle of Wight and France, Germany, Spain, and Romania, though some could be to Polacanthus. But there have been lots of different findings of Hylaeosaurus basically throughout time, which is pretty cool. And I really do like these guys. So in terms of their description, they were originally estimated to be quite big, about like 7 meters long and about half the size of Iguanodon and Megalosaurus. And at the time, it was actually modeled after a modern lizard, so it looked nothing like this, and was estimated to be about 6 meters long. But today, it's considered less than 5 meters long, and about 2 tons, with even some estimates being shorter, with an estimate of like 3 to 4 meters. So not the biggest ankylosaur, but definitely a decent-sized animal, 100%. And many details about its build is not that well known, since a lot of the material, especially from the holotype, is quite restricted. But we do have a pretty good general idea of what it looked like due to being having lots of close relatives. So no, it's probably pretty generally like typical Nodosaur look, and have that big row of large spikes down its back with all the osteoderms down its back as well, with a beak that was used to kind of bite and chew through low-lying vegetation. So nothing too extremely weird about it. And we know that there's one of the big distinguishing traits is the shoulder blade that comes up pretty much like 120 degrees out of the shoulder blade like that, so that gives it its own cool characteristic. And it's quite long spikes as well. And as I mentioned, these guys were the first ankylosaur discovered, it being the third earliest dinosaur discovered. And until the 20th century, its relations within the ankylosaur group was kind of unknown. But it's been recovered as a basal nothosaurid, or within Ankylosauridae, within most recent kind of phylogeny, so related to animals such as Myrapelta from the Jurassic, and Antarctopelta and Apollosaurus. It's kind of where it's been typically related to, but still a really cool animal. I think it's cool, and a cool animal to have and talk about as a mod, not just because of the animal itself, but how it represents, even though it's kind of the most unassuming, it's very important in the history of dinosaurs, being the third dinosaur discovered by Gideon Mantell and described by that, and almost kind of like a very important figure through time. And looking how Hylaeosaurus means forest lizard, and later he changed the name to the Wendell lizard because it was found in the Wendell group, and is actually really important in the history of paleontology. And it's really cool. Like Richard Owen had a big part in name as well, and all that. It's really cool. So yeah, really cool animal. Sweetener did a really wonderful job with this guy. Let's let them walk out and do their thing. So next, moving on to kind of returning animal, but we've got a different species. Again, done by Sweetener. We've got Tapejara, which is a really cool animal. We kind of covered that last time, but we'll have a look through. So this is the other species that I mentioned of last time about Tapejara. Let's pause it and have a look. So this is navigans, which is a more recent species, as we'll get into. Very interesting. So in 2021, T. navigans was very completely described. There's a really good fossil showing its soft tissue crest. So we know its crest kind of looked like that, very erect crest and high top like that. And it suggests that these two species might represent different sexes of one sexudomorphic species, potentially, but we don't really know that. But it's very likely that these guys could be their own species. And the main difference between the crest, as I mentioned, the T. imperator has got that very large crest. It's almost like a big sail. This one's a little bit more erect and pushes up more. And we have a pretty good idea of how it looks because we have a very complete specimen as well, which is really cool. So as I mentioned, these two are quite closely related to each other because they're obviously in the same genus, and very similar biologies. As I explained last time, they would have been largely terrestrial foragers, and it shows that they were probably quite capable of flight, as we see here, but that due to their large crest and forelimbs and things like that, they would have been quite adapted to running and moving around on the ground, which is potentially for their foraging, things like that, and pretty much really only flying to get to far places and getting away from predators. But yeah, really, really cool. Obviously, we're just covering this one rather quick because it's, of course, already been covered last week by a different species. If you guys want to watch part 21, I have the other species, Imperator, covered, but it's really cool to see this guy here. Really, really big fan. And Sweetener is obviously a big fan of dinosaurs and really makes those accurate mods, so you can kind of see... I kind of wish that you could see the detail of the pick the fibers, stuff like that, but generally looks pretty good. I'm a big fan of how it's come out, and I really like how Sweetener did the crest. It really gives it an interesting pattern as well, and really makes it look distinct, especially from the other species of Tubandactylus Imperator. So it really gives them two different mods and two different species. It's really, really cool. So yeah, now we've got that done. So we're moving on to another dinosaur. This one was obviously not done by Sweetener this time, by JWE2. So we've got the Masiakasaurus, which is a really, really cool animal I'm really excited to get stuck into. So you see we have got Masiakasaurus. So this is a small predatory nothosaur, or not nothosaur, nodosaurid. There's a small theropod from the late Cretaceous of Madagascar. And the name in Malagasy means vicious, so Madagascar means vicious. So vicious lizard is its scientific name, or at least its genus. And its binomial name is Masiakasaurus Kopferli, which is named after the musician Mark Kopferli, which was... kind of the music that he made obviously inspired the crew when they were digging up the specimen and on the expedition. Really, really interesting as well. Remains have been found from the late Cretaceous Maranivo Formation in Madagascar and was first described in 2001. But in 2011, there's been other specimens found, and it shows other parts of the body, such as the brain case, rib cage, things like that. And it really showed that it was very much a nothosaurid, and has actually made this genus one of the best-known dinosaurs, both in anatomy and being a nothosaur as well. And it actually helped show that these guys have a quite close evolutionary relationship with ceratosaurs. So that bit of fossils told us where it better fit in the dinosaur family tree, and obviously allowed us to learn a lot more about these wonderful animals. So you can see here the most kind of distinctive thing that jumps out at you when you look at Masiakasaurus is its really weird jaws. So you can see they've got heterodont teeth, which means its teeth are not all the same. And it's got these serrations as well. It's believed to be help with catching slippery prey and things like that. And there's a lot of really interesting characteristics in that way. And having these kind of large teeth that stick out here like that, and things that look slightly different. And it's believed to be because they would use that to catch slippery prey or smaller prey, things like that, would have given them an advantage. And its kind of morphology is intermediate between the abelisaurids and your more basal ceratosaurs, like Ceratosaurus, for example. And it's kind of like an evolutionary grade between them, since nothosaurids probably split off a lot earlier than abelisaurs would have, which shows a little bit of evolution there. You can see there they've got quite small limbs there, not the biggest, not like small in terms of Tyrannosaurus small, but they've got that large scapular coracoid as well, even compared to a lot of the ceratosaurs. And they have longer forelimbs, but the humeri are relatively short. And they have this large raptorial ungual claw, as you can see, which is like almost like a velociraptorid or raptor type, claw, which is pretty cool. That was how it was originally interpreted, but now it's something on the finger, which is quite interesting. And it suggests that these guys, as other notosaurids and relatives suggest that they could potentially have quite a good digging ability with their arms, which is pretty interesting. But initially, this was described as a basal abellisaurid until it was described as a noasaurid. And noasaurid is a very interesting group. They include Noasaurus and also Deltadromeus, potentially Lemiosaurus, Elaphiosaurus from Africa, and things like that, which is really interesting. So you can see here also a lot of the different adaptations that have. There's believed to be two different varieties. There could be sexual dimorphism, two different populations, things like that, which is quite interesting. And it's believed to be a diet because of their like jaws and the prominent front teeth. It's believed that these guys were adapted for eating small prey and being unsuitable for kind of ripping apart larger parts of food. So it could have potentially been like a fish eater or just eat slippery prey or just smaller prey. And it's quite a novel thing, and even suggested that they could have eaten small vertebrates, invertebrates, potentially even fruit as well. And one thing we know a lot about these guys as well is that they would have been a good subject because we have an abundance of fossils from a lot of ages. They give us a really good idea of how dinosaurs grow over time, or at least Masiakasaurus grow over time. So it's a great way to study dinosaur growth. And the study that looked at this showed that Masiakasaurus kind of represented a juvenile form. They took 8 to 10 years to grow to the size of a large dog, which indicates a rate that's actually 40% slower than a lot of non-avian theropods. So compared to most theropods, they would have grown quite slow, but compared to crocodilians, they would have grown quite fast. So it suggests that this kind of slow growth was an advantage due to living in potentially a semi-arid or stressful environment, or just not needing to grow as fast because they're on an island. So there is a lot of variation within dinosaur growth. Some smaller dinosaurs take a long time to grow, but some dinosaurs such as Tyrannosaurus and sauropods especially grow really, really fast. So it shows that there's a lot of variation within dinosaurs and their growth rates, which is very, very interesting. But yeah, we'll let them go. So Hyper did a really great job with these guys. So let them speed through a bit. So next we've got a mega-raptorid again. We've got Raptor. So this wonderful dinosaur is done by Waffalo, which is kind of a new model on the scene, but looks really, really nice that we get to see some nice, cool, more obscure dinosaurs. So this is a dinosaur that's a mega-raptorid theropod related to animals such as Australoveneta and Mapimacrothorax, as I mentioned before, and is from the late Cretaceous of Argentina, from the Huincal Formation, so it lived with animals kind of like Argentinosaurus, things like that. And it's known from some vertebrae and some things like that. And it was discovered in 2010, but was only described in 2016. They've often been also considered synonymous or the same as the theropod Wallaco, which is another type of mega-raptorid with kind of a better description, though we don't really know. And it showed that there may be some differences between the two, and obviously the study as well, different studies. So it shows that these guys could potentially be two different species of mega-raptorid living in the same habitat, which is quite possible. It's not the end of the world. And was quite big as well. Estimates show that this guy could grow about 20 feet long, or about 6 meters, and weigh up to about 550 kilograms, or a little over 1,200 pounds when they're fully grown. And their name comes from the Tehuluchi language Anoli, which means south, and the Latin word raptor, so basically means southern thief. And it also, scientific name, Libertarium, which comes from the Latin word from freedom, so that's what liberal means, freedom, and was discovered on the bicentennial of Argentina's independence from Spain in 1810, so really interesting little tidbit of history added there as well. Really, really cool animal. How can you not love your mega-raptorids? And it doesn't seem to, since we don't know much, we only know pretty much a few vertebrae and things. This is pretty standard anatomy for mega-raptorids, other than the pronated hands and, the classic Jurassic Park problems. But other than that, it's pretty spot on. Really, really cool that we get to see these guys. So next up, second to last, we're back with Sweetener. We're going to the lagoons. We've got Placentasaurus, which is another really, really cool animal. So let's let you swim through. Let's have a look at you swimming there. Look at you, little cutie. These guys, yeah, those guys are different colors. But let's have a look at you. Have a look at you since you're so pretty. But this is a very interesting animal. This is Placentasaurus, which means credible lizard, which is pretty cool. These guys are an extinct genus of ancient Psychopterygian reptiles. These guys are quite closely related to not pterosaurs, plesiosaurs, and a lot of those other marine reptiles that you know and love. Quite an early animal as well. Fossils have been found in France and Germany, and they date back to the Middle Jurassic, with a single species known, Placentasaurus longivorus, and it's kind of the oldest subaquatic flying reptile known, which is really, really cool. So they generally look a lot like most other Psychopterygians from the Jurassic, but they have a lot of things that make them different. As you can see here, they've got this extended nares here and this quite weird snout that almost looks like a weird dolphin. It reminds me of a dolphin. And they've got a lot of very weird things about them like that, and the small nasal size, and they have that, and they're more closely related to plesiosaurs than they are to animals such as Nothosaurus, so they're kind of that in-between, though they are not that closely related to either of them in that regard. So these guys got to a pretty decent size, about probably 3 meters long, and they kind of resembled that of a Nothosaur, but they had stiff vertebral column and had these large paddle-like flippers that they used to swim around like the later plesiosaurs would, so they're kind of really that in between. And although they did resemble the head did resemble that of a plesiosaur, they have that primitive palate and lots of really sharp, small teeth for catching and eating fish like a Nothosaurus, so kind of that in between, as I mentioned. And in the research, since there's been a lot of research into this guy, because it's kind of the in between and tells us a lot about the evolution of marine reptiles, there's been a bit of study into these. And it shows that these guys were kind of in that halfway and showing how they would swim and having like a flattened ulna to put bigger muscles on, and kind of showing their evolution. And some parts, like the pelvic girdle, was more similar to the primitive Psychopterygians rather than the later plesiosaurs. So it's kind of in between, and really tells us a lot about the evolution of these marine reptiles. And as I mentioned, the classification, they're quite basal, Cetatosauria, so they're quite related to animals such as Bobosaurus and Euzingosaurus, which are kind of that really groups that split off. They were kind of this basal group, and then the plesiosaurs kind of split off from there, and obviously became the pliosaurs and the plesiosaurs, and many of the famous animals you guys know and love, things like that. And in terms of discovery, a lot of these non-plesiosaurian Psychopterygians have been found in China, America, Europe, and Middle East. But these guys have been found, in particular, the species have been found along Europe. And a lot of these have really changed the evolution of all that. And it also suggests that these guys could have got a lot of bone necrosis with decompression sickness in these guys, which shows that these guys lived in kind of an aquatic or semi-aquatic environment. And he also stated the possibility of Placentasaurus living in open marine cold waters. And these guys probably lived out in the open sea doing their own thing, which is really cool. Tells us a little bit about their ecology and shows that they would be quite adept swimmers and have these issues like that. So yeah, really cool. Like, some simple little things tell us so much about their lifestyle. And with the small conical teeth they have and all that, they would most likely definitely be eating fish and squids and things like that. I almost think like beaked whale in terms of ecology. I think that's what it most reminds me of. So yeah, we'll let these guys swim off, and then we'll have a look at everyone's favorite big bad shark returning again as a new species by LA Studios. So let them swim off, and we'll have to have a little bit of a drum roll. So next up, we've got everyone's favorite big bad shark. We've got the Megalodon. So let's get you swimming out there. Let's see if we can get you in a nice position. So this is, of course, your Megalodon. So there we are. So Megalodon, which names means big tooth, surprisingly, is a species of mackerel shark that lived from the early Miocene, or about 23 million years ago, up until the Pliocene, so about 3 million years ago or so. Very long-lived animal. Was formerly thought to be related to the modern great white shark, but it turns out to be in its own group on Octotidae, which is a group of sharks that split from the great whites during the early Cretaceous. So kind of a group of like really megatooth sharks is kind of their name. And Megalodon doesn't really need an introduction. It's one of the largest and most powerful predators to ever live, though it's really only known from teeth and a few other fragmentary remains. Scientists have been spending years trying to figure out how exactly big it is, but the most recent estimates pretty much take it between like 10 to like 20 meters long, though most kind of suggest something within there. So like about, let's say 14, 15 meters. We'll just say that, though there's lots of different estimates because basing on different things, you get a lot of different sizes. And they would have kind of resembled a stocky version of great white shark just because they have sort of similar ecologies. But there'd have been a lot of body differences that we don't really know because we don't really have fossils of them other than teeth. But it's believed to be they would have acted in terms of behavior a lot like great white sharks. We know that they hunted a lot of really large animals. That includes early whales, large seals and sea turtles and other sharks as well. So that's kind of how we know their ecology as well. Would have been quite a robust shark, similar in size, a little bit bigger than whale sharks and basking sharks. They would have looked quite different. And there's lots of, as I mentioned, lots of estimates, things like that. It's believed to be these guys would have had a bite force that was just astronomically huge, like 182,000 newtons, which is like almost comparable to like great white sharks. So the largest confirmed great white shark had a bite force of about 18,000 newtons, so this blows it out of the water. So based on what we have seen from these fossil record on these estimates of like other animals getting bitten by Megalodon, suggest that these guys would have been eating whales, as I mentioned, sharks, sea lions, marine mammals. Pretty much they were on that seafood diet. They eat it. And they also had a cosmopolitan distribution, so they were found all over the world. They could pretty much be found everywhere from Europe to Africa to Australia and New Zealand, pretty much everywhere. Since the world was a little bit warmer at the time, so there would have been generally warmer water around the world. Except maybe the furthest poles, you wouldn't really find them there, but they would have lived in those areas. And as I mentioned, they are pretty much found everywhere. There's so much that we found them at Megalodon. There would have been prey relations, as I've mentioned. They have that high-speed, powerful jaws. They would have been preying on many cetaceans, including like the raptorial sperm whales like Leviathan, which we'll get into. Lots of cetothares, so like small-beaked whales, sirens, sea turtles, other fish. And they suggest that these guys almost were like an apex predator. They kind of had a niche in the food chain that potentially has no comparison. But a lot of that's also talked about because how they figured that out was that the nitrogen in these guys was just so high. There's not really a ecological comparison, but they could be eating a lot of baby whales. And baby whales and baby mammals are typically full of nitrogen because they basically take the nitrogen out of their mother. So that could have given a weird result. But these guys were definitely in a kind of realm of their own, though they did have competition with animals such as these large macro-raptorial sperm whales like Leviathan, which potentially got about the same size as Megalodon and also kind of lived in packs and things like that. Though they eventually went extinct, and then the early ancestors of orcas could have been competition for these guys as well as being pack hunters and things like that. If their ecology was anything like modern orcas, they would be able to take on sperm whales and blue whales, so they could definitely take on a Megalodon. And in terms of the feeding strategy, it's believed to be actually quite similar to great white sharks, but also some other ones. They would have basically kind of opened their jaws and just bite the tails of the flippers, trying to immobilize their victims, especially with larger prey. And there's also evidence that they actually had different strategies for different animals. So they would have often even tried to bite the head of a sperm whale to try and get a fatal bite, and also get that melon, which is just fat, and fat is obviously quite nutritious. So they would have had different hunting strategies as well, especially during the Pliocene where larger cetaceans were starting to evolve. These guys would have basically bit the flippers or the tail vertebrae of these large whales to try and immobilize it and then feed on it, which is very interesting. Also as well, there's been a lot of study into the growth and reproduction. And because we have so many teeth, we're able to kind of track it over time. And it's estimated that a megalodon would have been born at about 2 meters long, or about 6'7", and grown at about 16 centimeters per year. So that means a 15-meter individual would have taken between 88 to 100 years to grow, which sounds like a lot, but compared to modern sharks, like great white sharks have been known to potentially live up to 70 years or so. So it's not that outlandish. But some have even given estimates of like 46-year-old individual at 16 meters long. So very possible that they did have that kind of lifespan. They just grew a little slower. And there's also been lots of nurseries found as well. So we have areas where mother megalodons would come and birth their babies, especially around the Canary Islands as well, in Florida and in Panama. There would have been some, and there's even evidence of these sharks, because these infant megalodons were kind of like 3 or 4 meters long at their smallest. These pups would have actually kind of been at danger from other shark species. That includes the snaggletooth sharks and great hammerhead sharks. So, which is very interesting. I think I mentioned that when I talked about great hammerheads, how the great hammerheads would have hunted on young megalodons during like the Pliocene and the Miocene, things like that, which is very interesting. Though during this time, these young megalodon would have lived in the shallows and fed on fish, sea turtles, and dugongs and small cetaceans. But as they got bigger and became adults, they moved out into the open ocean and started to eat the larger whales and things like that. And there's actually evidence of a juvenile megalodon may have actually hunted very large whales. There's actually evidence of a 4 to 7 meter-old megalodon from the Pliocene actually found in the rib. There was a tooth of it found in the rib of an ancestral blue or humpback whale, which showed that the whale survived and healed from this megalodon attack. So this little guy might have bitten off a little bit more than he could chew, of course, but that's quite funny. And one of the big things about Megalodon is, why did they become extinct? And a lot of the reasons why people think they went extinct includes climate change, because during the end of the Pleistocene, that's when the Pliocene, that's when kind of the ice ages started to happen. So basically the world cooled and the whales started to move up to the poles where the Megalodon couldn't follow and went extinct, even though it very likely could have been a mesotherm, and potentially both of these factors could. Those are kind of the two most contributing factors. There's also ideas that these guys could have been outcompeted by other animals, such as great white sharks when they're younger, or potentially killer whales as well. But it's kind of potentially a combination of these factors, rather than just competition or losing prey and things like that. Could have been all of these that could have contributed to the extinction of Megalodon. But even though the shark's been extinct for 3 million years, that does not stop people loving and talking about it. So there's been lots of talks about Megalodon being at the deep depths of the ocean, and cryptozoologists love talking about it, though it's very, very unlikely, since these guys would have lived in open waters preying on large whales, because that's what their ecology was. So if Megalodon still exists, we'd probably be seeing a lot of dead whales with big Megalodon-sized chunks out of them, and they would be seeing them much more often, potentially attacking boats. So it's very unlikely that Megalodon would have been living in the bottom of the ocean, because of how nutrient poor and and there's not many whales down there for them to eat. Just doesn't really fit their ecology. But you see all these movies like The Meg and things like that. Very cool, and I love people talking about Megalodon and the general kind of zeitgeist, but they're most definitely extinct. And if you guys like Megalodon, you can buy their teeth pretty much everywhere. I've got a Megalodon tooth. They're just such beautiful animals. And LA Studios did a really great job of bringing this guy to life. I believe LA Studios was going to remake it to make it a little bit more accurate to Megalodon, because his colors are not quite right. I think it would be really cool to have a hyper-accurate Megalodon trying to create its own patterns, things like that. It'd be really, really cool. But this is a great representative of the animal so far, and once that happens, I'll definitely show you guys it. So I think this would be a great place to end the video. So yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.